Some stories are never truly finished. They live quietly in the minds of those who knew the victims, in the files of detectives who never stopped asking questions, and in the silence of unanswered rooms. True crime, at its heart, is not about darkness. It is about the search for truth, the need to say, this person mattered, this life was real, and what happened to them deserves to be known. Good evening, and welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime, a quiet corner of the night where real stories are told slowly, gently, and always with care. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're glad the night brought you here. Before we begin, take a breath, drop your shoulders, unclench your hands, and let the weight of the day begin to fade. Tonight, we have 5 stories waiting for you. Cases that were once shrouded in mystery, confusion, and grief, until the truth, slowly and quietly, found its way to the surface. Each story will unfold at an unhurried pace, carried by the soft sound of rain and the comfort of a darkened screen, a space built for you to simply listen and rest. These are real cases, real people, real families, shared here with honesty and with the deepest respect. So settle in now, let the rain begin to fall, dim the lights, and let your body grow still. When you're ready, let's begin. Story 1. The Case of Jesse Geoghegan. Tonight I want to tell you a story about a young man in a quiet Florida town who never made it home the way he should have. A story about betrayal and love gone terribly wrong, and the web of secrets that unraveled long after it was already too late. This is the kind of story that makes you hold your blanket a little tighter, the kind that lingers in that soft place between waking and sleep. Pensacola, Florida sits right at the far western edge of the state, so close to Alabama that you could almost miss it on a map. It is a Gulf Coast town with warm salt air and long flat roads that stretch out toward the water. The kind of place where people know each other's names, where neighborhoods bleed into one another, where the same faces appear again and again at the same gas stations and corner stores. Medford Avenue, in particular, sits in a quiet residential pocket of the city in a community called Montclair. The houses there are modest and close together. The kind of street where a car parked in front of the wrong house can be noticed, where sounds carry through open windows on warm autumn afternoons. It was on Medford Avenue, on a Saturday in late October of the year 2022, that everything changed. Jesse Allen Geoghegan was 26 years old when he died. Those who loved him will tell you, he was not a perfect man. He had his struggles. Just 3 days before he was killed, he had been arrested on drug charges and a vehicle theft accusation. His sister, Cheyenne Arnold, addressed those facts plainly, and with a kind of fierce, grieving honesty that only someone who truly loves a person can offer. He's a human, she said. He makes mistakes. His mistakes don't define him as a person. And then she said something that has stayed with people ever since. When he loved, she said, he loved with everything he had, and then some. Jesse had a big heart. The people who knew him understood that, in the complicated and imperfect way that people can carry both light and shadow at the same time. He was someone's brother, someone's friend. He was, on that October afternoon, simply a young man who had come home to collect some of his belongings. He was in the process of moving out. His sister told reporters that Jesse had been at her house just hours before he was killed. He had stopped by the way people do, the way you do when life is busy and you are in the middle of something and you have no reason to believe the afternoon will be your last. He had just been there, and then he wasn't. To understand what happened on Medford Avenue, you first have to understand the tangle of relationships that surrounded Jesse Geoghegan in his final weeks. There was a woman named Alyssa Marie Blackburn. She was 22 years old at the time. She was, according to the evidence presented at trial, Jesse's girlfriend, his partner, the person who was supposed to be closest to him. But Alyssa was also in a relationship with another man, a man named Jacob Colville. And Jacob Colville was, by every account that would later emerge in court, a dangerous person. A man with a history and a temper and a willingness to cross lines that most people would never approach. Somewhere in the middle of these two relationships, Alyssa Blackburn had made a choice. Perhaps it built slowly, the way bad decisions often do, one small step at a time, until suddenly the distance traveled is enormous and there is no clear path back. Perhaps it happened faster than that. Courts and juries can establish timelines, but they cannot always explain the human mind, the way people talk themselves into terrible things. The way love and anger and fear can become indistinguishable from one another. What the evidence would ultimately show was this. Alyssa Blackburn had, at some point before October 29th of 2022, expressed a desire for Jesse Giagan to be, as she reportedly put it, made to leave her alone, and she had said it to Jacob Colville. Text messages recovered during the investigation showed discord, ongoing and simmering between Alyssa, Jesse, and Jacob. A triangle of people all pulling in different directions with too much pride and too much history and not enough wisdom to simply walk away. 9 minutes before Jesse Giagan was murdered, Alyssa Blackburn sent a message to a friend. She wrote that Jacob Colville was going to kill Jesse. 9 minutes, and no one stopped it. Afternoon of Saturday, October 29th, 2022, was ordinary in the way that awful days so often are, right until they aren't. Jesse was at the home on Medford Avenue. He had a friend with him, someone who had come to help him move some of his belongings. His sister had confirmed he was in the process of leaving the residence. It was the kind of task that takes a few hours, that requires help lifting and sorting and loading. Simple and mundane, and the sort of thing that gets done without ceremony. Earlier that day, there had already been a confrontation of sorts. According to the initial report, Jesse and the same friend had pulled up to the home at one point, and there was a black Toyota nearby. Jesse, in a moment of anger, had reportedly climbed onto the roof of that Toyota and broken the sunroof. The Toyota belonged to Jacob Colville. Colville drove away. It was an act of impulse, the kind that feels satisfying for exactly as long as it takes the other person to decide what to do about it. Jacob Colville decided. Later that afternoon, the black Toyota returned. What happened next was captured in its entirety on a digital video recording system inside the home. The surveillance cameras recorded everything from the moment the Toyota arrived outside to the last shot fired. Prosecutors would later describe what the footage showed as a search and destroy mission. That phrase, cold and military and precise, would become the defining description of that afternoon. It captures something important about the nature of what occurred. This was not a confrontation that escalated out of control. This was not a crime of passion in the impulsive sense. This was, according to the evidence, a planned operation. Alyssa Blackburn arrived at the home alongside Jacob Colville and a third man, a man named Lawrence Bonner Jr. She was, court documents state, armed with a black semi-automatic handgun. She entered the residence first. She went through the house, looking for Jesse. She did not find him. Jesse Giagan, hearing or sensing danger, had hidden. He had slipped into the closet at the back of his bedroom. In the darkened quiet of that small space, he waited, hoping perhaps that whoever had come would simply leave. Alyssa Blackburn exited the home. She told Colville and Bonner that Jesse was inside, and then Jacob Colville called Alyssa directly on her cell phone to confirm, to make sure, to close the last door of doubt. The call was confirmed later by records from Alyssa's cellular phone. Colville hung up. And then he walked back inside the house. The friend who had been with Jesse that afternoon was still present during parts of what followed. He would later tell deputies what he had witnessed and heard from inside that home. He heard 2 gunshots. Then he saw Jacob Colville walking backwards out of a room with 2 guns drawn. What came next, the friend described with the kind of terrible clarity that people who witness violence carry with them long after. Jesse Giagan had been found in that closet. He had been shot twice, and still, wounded, he did not fall immediately. He limped out of the bedroom bleeding from his leg and his chest. "Call 911, Jesse said. Those were among his last words. The words of a person who still believed there was a way to survive this. Jacob Colville shot him a few more times as he limped across the floor. Jesse fell, and then according to the report, Colville shot him 2 more times after he was already down. After he was already gone, then Colville and Bonner walked out of the house, got into the black Toyota, and drove away. Jesse Geoghegan was transported to the hospital. He died from his wounds. In the hours that followed the shooting, a car was found on fire underneath the 11-Mile Creek Bridge, not far from the scene. Investigators believed it was connected to the murder. The fire that destroys evidence, that erases the trail. It is a detail that speaks to a certain kind of planning, a certain kind of cold-bloodedness. Alyssa Blackburn, when she spoke to investigators in the immediate aftermath, told the story. She said she had been walking the dog, and that when she came back, she found Jesse shot. She had not been inside. She had not known. She was a grieving girlfriend returning to horror. It was a lie, and it began to unravel almost immediately. Surveillance footage from inside the home told the true story. Eyewitness statements corroborated what the cameras had recorded. Her cellular phone data placed her in contact with Colville in those critical minutes. And then there were the text messages, the string of digital breadcrumbs that showed not only that she had known what was going to happen, but that in some deeply troubling way she had wanted it. The story she told investigators lasted about as long as it took the Escambia County Sheriff's deputies to review the footage. Jacob Colville did not stay in Pensacola after the murder. He fled. For a week he remained at large, a wanted man with a first-degree murder warrant and nothing left to lose. Law enforcement searched for him across Florida, following leads and tracing his movements. 1 week after Jesse Geoghegan was killed, officers with the Eustis Police Department in Lake County in Central Florida found Jacob Colville. He had been attempting to disguise himself. A search of the vehicle he was in turned up a firearm, methamphetamine, drug paraphernalia, and a backpack containing makeup and a hat with an attached wig. He had been using the makeup to cover his tattoos, the identifying marks that might give him away. He was arrested. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder in the death of Jesse Geoghegan, along with additional charges of armed trafficking of methamphetamine, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and related offenses. Lawrence Bonner Jr. had already been arrested before Colville was found. He was charged as a principal to first-degree premeditated murder. Alyssa Blackburn was also indicted on the same charge. 3 people, 1 dead young man. A home on Medford Avenue that would never feel ordinary again. The legal proceedings that followed the murder of Jesse Geoghegan stretched across years the way serious criminal cases often do, unfolding in separate courtrooms with separate juries, separate verdicts, separate sentences. Jacob Colville went to trial first. His case was heard in June of 2024, nearly 2 full years after he had walked into that house on Medford Avenue with guns in his hands. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney Amy Shea, built its case around the surveillance footage, the witness testimony, and the simple, undeniable reality of what the cameras had captured. This is a case, Amy Shea told the jury in her closing argument, where the video really speaks for itself. The courtroom sat in near total silence for the first 5 minutes of her closing, while 3 separate surveillance feeds played on a screen at the front of the room. 3 angles, 3 timestamps, 1 complete picture of everything that had occurred on that October afternoon. No narration was needed. It's blatantly obvious, she told the jury. The defendant goes to the victim's home armed to the teeth with the sole purpose and intent of shooting and killing Jesse Geoghegan. The jury found Jacob Colville guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. He was sentenced to life in prison immediately by Circuit Judge Coleman Lee Robinson. There would be no parole. There would be no second chance. Jacob Colville, who was 31 years old at the time of sentencing, would die in a Florida state prison. After the verdict, asked if he had any regrets, Colville reportedly said he did not regret it. Those words settled over the courtroom like something heavy and permanent. Lawrence Bonner Jr. had a different reckoning. The evidence suggested that Bonner's involvement, while still deeply serious, was of a lesser degree than Colville's. He had been present, he had entered the home, but the details of his specific actions were less clear, and the prosecution recognized the value of his testimony in their case against Alyssa Blackburn. In August of 2024, Bonner reached a deal with prosecutors. He agreed to plead no contest to principal to second-degree murder, and he agreed to cooperate fully with the state, to testify. to tell what he knew on the record in open court. In exchange, his sentence was capped. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with credit for the time he had already served while awaiting trial, more than 1,046 days, which meant that in practical terms his time was nearly done. His plea agreement required him to provide, as the legal documents stated, truthful testimony at deposition and at trial regarding all facts and circumstances surrounding the death investigation of Jesse Geoghegan. He would wait behind bars until after Alyssa Blackburn's trial, and then he would walk into a courtroom and tell the jury what he knew. Nearly 3 years after Jesse Geoghegan was killed on Medford Avenue, Alyssa Marie Blackburn finally went to trial. The date was August 14th, 2025. She was 25 years old by then, years removed from the night she had carried a handgun into her boyfriend's house and told 2 men where to find him. She had spent those years on the other side of the courtroom from the inside, watching first Jacob Colville, then Lawrence Bonner face their own accountability. Now it was her turn. She was charged as a principal to second-degree murder under Florida law, which holds that a person can be found equally responsible for a crime if they participated in, assisted with, or encouraged it, regardless of whether they were the one who physically carried out the act. She did not have to have pulled the trigger to be guilty. She had done something, arguably more calculating than that. She had opened the door. The prosecution presented text messages, dozens of them, carefully extracted from Blackburn's phone, reconstructing the days and hours leading up to Jesse's death. The messages showed the discord, the jealousy, the mounting tension of a woman caught between 2 men and unwilling or unable to resolve it through any means other than the most irreversible one. They showed her telling Colville, in her own words, that she wanted Jesse to be made to leave her alone. They showed her, 9 minutes before Jesse died, telling a friend that Colville was going to kill him, and then the surveillance footage played again for a new jury. The same footage that had convicted Colville. Alyssa Blackburn entering the home, armed, searching, leaving, making the call. And then, from the other side of the front door, the sounds and images of what came after. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict of guilty. Alyssa Marie Blackburn was convicted of being a principal to second-degree murder. The sentencing hearing was held on October 8th, 2025, in front of Circuit Judge Amy Broderson. Before the judge handed down her decision, members of Jesse Geoghegan's family were given the opportunity to address the court, to stand in that room and speak into the record and say the things that had been accumulating inside of them for 3 years. Jesse's sister, Ashley Arnold, stepped forward. She spoke with the kind of quiet grief that goes beyond anger, the kind that has had years to settle into something permanent and unremovable. She told the judge that her brother's murder had changed everything, that the world was different now in a way it could never be undone, that Jesse had simply been trying to come home that day. Now that he's gone, she said, everything is different. He was just trying to come home that day, and now he's sitting on a shelf in my house. And then she said, with the weight of someone who knows exactly what they are losing by saying it, a whole part of me is gone. Another sister, Cheyenne, had spoken in the days after the murder, before any verdicts, before any sentences. I hope that you live with it every day of your life, she had said, about the people responsible. Now, 3 years later, the court was deciding whether they would. Judge Amy Broderson handed down her sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Alyssa Marie Blackburn would spend the remainder of her life in a Florida State Correctional Facility. She would not come home. She would not see another October afternoon on any street other than the one behind prison walls. She would grow old inside that sentence, if she grew old at all. 3 people went to prison for the murder of Jesse Geoghegan. Jacob Colville, life without parole. Lawrence Bonner Jr., 5 years with time served. Alyssa Marie Blackburn, life without parole. Jesse Geoghegan was 26 years old when he hid in the back of a bedroom closet and listened to people move through his house looking for him. He was 26 years old when he limped out of that room and asked someone to call for help. He was 26 years old when no help came in time. He had made mistakes. He had loved deeply. He had, in the hours before he died, spent time at his sister's house, the ordinary, unremarkable kind of time that families share without knowing it is precious until it is gone. His sister said he was going to come through her door one day and say it was okay. He never did. The surveillance footage from inside that house on Medford Avenue exists somewhere in an evidence locker, on a hard drive in the court record. The whole story is on it. The arrival, the search, the phone call, the final minutes, all of it preserved on a digital recording that nobody who watched it in that courtroom is likely to forget. Sometimes justice comes. Sometimes it takes 3 years and 3 separate trials and 2 sisters speaking into a microphone in a courtroom while a judge listens. Sometimes the evidence is all there, the texts and the footage and the witness accounts, and still it takes that long for the legal machinery to finish turning. But it turned. Jesse Geoghegan deserved better than the afternoon he was given on October 29th, 2022. He deserved the chance to finish moving out of that house, to drive away, to begin whatever came next. He didn't get that chance, but the people who took it from him, they are no longer free. They will carry that October afternoon with them for the rest of their lives in a way they cannot put down or walk away from. And Jesse, complicated and human and deeply loved, is remembered. His sister keeps him on a shelf, and somewhere in the memory of the people who loved him, he is still coming through the door. That is the story of Jesse Geoghegan and the long road that carried everyone involved toward the only kind of ending available. If this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to Mr. Sleepy Crime, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world. Or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our second story. Story 2. The Case of Tatiana Kassab. Tonight I am going to tell you a story, the kind that unfolds slowly like fog rolling in over a quiet Wisconsin neighborhood, where the houses all look the same and the lawns are trimmed and nothing, on the surface, ever appears to be wrong. This is a story about a mother, a woman who crossed an ocean, who built a life from almost nothing, who loved her son deeply, and who, on an ordinary winter evening, could not have known that the life she had so carefully constructed was about to come to a devastating, irreversible end. Her name was Tatiana Kassab, and this is her story. Somewhere in the small landlocked country of Moldova, a girl grew up. Moldova, if you have never heard of it, is a quiet country tucked between Romania to the west and Ukraine to the east. It is one of the smallest nations in Europe, a former republic of the Soviet Union, a place where many families dreamed of somewhere else, somewhere with more opportunity, more stability, more hope. And Tatiana Kassab was by all accounts one of those dreamers. We do not know every chapter of Tatiana's early life. The details, as with many immigrant stories, are sparse and private. What we do know is that at some point she made the kind of decision that takes extraordinary courage, the decision to leave the only world you have ever known and start again somewhere completely foreign. She came to the United States with her son Nikita. He was only a small child when they made the crossing, young enough that America would become his whole world, young enough that Moldova would fade into the background of his memory, like a half-remembered dream. Tatiana eventually settled in Wisconsin, in the village of Waukesha to be precise, a suburb about 20 miles west of Milwaukee, a place of quiet streets and chain restaurants and school buses and ordinary American life. She met a man named Donald Mayer. He was 51 years old, a steady presence, and by the accounts of those who knew the family, a kind one. He and Tatiana married, and by the time the world caught up with their story, they had been together for roughly 9 years. Donald welcomed Nikita into his life as a stepson. He reportedly treated the boy like his own. From the outside, the family at Cider Hills Drive appeared to be doing exactly what immigrants dream of doing. They were making it. Tatiana had enrolled at Carroll College, studying and building toward something. Nikita, their son, their teenager, was by all appearances a model student at Waukesha West High School. He had never missed a single day of school, not one. His attendance record was quite literally perfect. Neighbors noticed nothing unusual. There were no loud arguments spilling out into the driveway, no calls to the police, no warning signs written in the air of that quiet suburban street. The family, as seen from the outside, was simply a family. Ordinary, unremarkable, safe. But things that appear safe are not always so. There is always a moment in these stories where we look back and ask ourselves, were there signs? Were there things that might have told us, if only we had been paying closer enough attention, that something was very wrong? In Nikita's case, the answer is complicated. Nikita Kassup had told at least one friend that he had a happy childhood. He said it plainly, as a matter of fact, and there is no reason to disbelieve him entirely. Donald Mayer reportedly treated him well. Tatiana was, by all indications, a devoted mother. The home had warmth in it. There were family photos. There was a dog, a loyal, gentle dog named Toby, who would eventually become one of the most heartbreaking details of this entire case. But something had shifted inside Nikita. Quietly, invisibly, the way a crack spreads through ice before anyone thinks to test the surface. Prosecutors would later say that Nikita had been spending enormous amounts of time online, deep in corners of the internet that most people would never willingly visit. He had been reading about serial killers. He had been reading about school shootings. He had become, according to District Attorney Leslie Bose, addicted to disturbing websites, though she did not elaborate on the specifics in open court. What the evidence did reveal, in painstaking digital detail, was a young man who had constructed an entire alternate reality inside his head. A reality in which he believed himself to be part of a revolution, a soldier in a war that only he and a handful of strangers on the internet could fully see. He had been communicating through an encrypted messaging application called Telegram with at least one individual who spoke Russian. The nature of that relationship, who the person was, how they found each other, what precisely was promised and exchanged, remained murky. But the messages themselves were preserved, and they were chilling. In those messages, Nikita asked questions, practical questions, logistical questions, questions that no 17-year-old boy should ever be asking. He asked how long he would need to hide before being moved to safety. He asked whether he would be able to live a normal life in Ukraine even after it was found out what he had done. He asked these questions as though the answer to them was only a matter of timing. He had also, investigators would discover, written a manifesto. 3 pages, single-spaced, rambling, and filled with the kind of hateful ideology that spreads like a virus through the darkest online spaces. The manifesto called for violence. It named a specific target. It spoke of revolution, of collapse, of saving what Nikita had convinced himself was worth saving. He had purchased, or was in the process of purchasing, a drone. He had inquired about explosives. He had, according to federal authorities, paid for at least a portion of what was described as a weapon of mass destruction. All of this was happening in the months before February of 2025. And Tatiana Kassup, who loved her son, who had uprooted her entire life to give him a better one, did not know. On February 11th, 2025, it was a Tuesday, Tatiana Kassup attended class at Carroll College. Security cameras would later capture her at a grocery store called Pick and Save on Sunset Drive that evening. She was wearing a winter coat. She looked like a woman doing errands, the kind of quiet, unremarkable errand that fills the in-between spaces of a life. She was picking up something from the store. She was going home. Donald Mayer had also been out that day. He was captured on surveillance footage at a grocery store called Woodman's. He too was heading home. Neither of them would ever be seen alive again. What happened inside that house on Cider Hills Drive in the hours that followed? the precise sequence of events, the words that may or may not have been spoken, remains a matter of evidence and inference. What the evidence showed coldly and clearly was this. At some point on or around February 11th, Nikita Kasap took a firearm, a .357 Magnum revolver that belonged to his stepfather, and he shot them both. Donald Mayer was shot in the back of the head. He was found later in the first-floor office of the home, his body covered in blankets and pillows, as though someone had attempted in some hollow way to make him comfortable. Tatiana Kasap was shot 4 times, in the neck, in the upper torso, in the abdomen, in the wrist. An autopsy would later confirm each wound in the clinical, heartbreaking language of forensic medicine. Her body was found in the hallway of the first floor, covered by a blanket and a towel. Her face, by the time police arrived, had already been darkened by decomposition. She had been lying there for 17 days. This is perhaps the part of the story that is hardest to absorb. After February 11th, Nikita Kasap did not leave. He stayed. He stayed in the house with his mother and his stepfather, with their bodies just down the hall and in the office, and he went about his days, or something that resembled his days. He sent emails to the school about his absences. He used Donald's bank debit card at locations around Waukesha, and then later at places further afield. He lit candles near his mother's body. He took photographs. Home security cameras mounted inside the house captured him moving through the space during those 17 days. Investigators reviewed the footage later and found him entering the rooms where the bodies lay. In one recording, he can be heard speaking. He says, in a tone that investigators described as disturbingly casual, that he could see the rotting body. He said it plainly, almost conversationally. He had also, in the days immediately following the murders, continued to submit schoolwork electronically. One assignment was submitted the day after the killings. The digital timestamp sitting there quietly like a record of something deeply, deeply broken. He sat with what he had done. He lived inside it. And then, on February 23rd, 12 days after the murders, he packed the car. He took Donald's Volkswagen Atlas. He took the .357 Magnum. He took $14,000 in cash, jewelry that belonged to his parents, their passports, their driver's licenses. He took Toby, the family dog, and he drove. He drove through Illinois, through Iowa, through Nebraska, through Wyoming, through Colorado. He drove west and south, a 17-year-old boy with a gun on the passenger seat and the weight of what he had done somewhere behind him on the highway. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, the silence was becoming impossible to ignore. Judith Mayer, Donald's mother, had not been able to reach her son or Tatiana for weeks. She told investigators later that she had been confused and hurt. She thought perhaps they were angry with her. She had received a handful of suspicious messages from Donald's phone on February 23rd. Messages that did not quite sound like Donald. Messages that felt off in a way she could not entirely articulate. But she did not know what to do. She waited. She wondered. Nikita's school had also noticed. He had not appeared for 2 weeks. That was extraordinary for a student with a perfect attendance record. Someone made a call. On Friday, February 28th, 2025, at 9:44 in the morning, the Waukesha County Communications Center received a call requesting a welfare check on a family residing in the village of Waukesha. Police officers arrived at the house on Cider Hills Drive. From the moment they stepped onto the property, something was wrong. The smell reached them before they reached the door. That particular, unmistakable smell that law enforcement officers know and that no one else ever wants to know. The odor of decay, as the official documentation would later describe it, neutral and clinical. 2 words that do not come close to capturing what it means to stand at the threshold of a house where 2 people have been dead for 17 days. Inside the hallway, beneath a blanket and a towel, they found Tatiana Kasap. Her face was blackened. Dried blood had pooled and dried on the floor around her. She was wearing the same winter coat she had been wearing in the grocery store footage from February 11th. Officers returned later with a warrant. In the first floor office, buried under blankets and clothing, they found Donald Mayer. Items throughout the home had been strewn and overturned, consistent with someone having searched the house, looking for money that might be hidden in various places. Artwork had been removed from the walls, drawers had been emptied. The family dog was gone. The car was gone. Nikita Kasap was gone, but not for long. On the same day that police were standing inside that house on Cider Hills Drive, Nikita Kasap was driving through rural northwestern Kansas. He had been on the road for 5 days by then. Somewhere in the flat, wide-open plains of a state he had likely never visited before, a traffic stop caught him. He ran a stop sign. It was something small, the kind of minor infraction that barely registers in a normal day. The kind of thing that most drivers do once in a while without consequence. But when officers pulled over the Volkswagen Atlas and looked inside, they found a great deal more than a teenager who had run a stop sign. The gun was in plain view on the passenger side floorboard. Unused ammunition and shell casings were in the vehicle. His parents' driver's licenses were there. $14,000 in cash, jewelry, passports, and Toby the dog sitting in the back seat alive and unharmed. The most innocent passenger in what had become one of the most disturbing cases Wisconsin had seen in years. Nikita Kasap was arrested on February 28, 2025. He was 17 years old. He was taken into custody without incident. Investigators seized Nikita's cell phone and other electronic devices, and what they found inside them painted a picture that had been forming quietly for months. The telegram messages came first. Messages in Russian exchanged between Nikita and at least one unknown individual. Messages from January of 2025 in which Nikita asked how long he would have to hide before being relocated. Messages in which he asked, in plain and practical terms, whether he would be able to live a normal life in Ukraine once what he had done became known. Then there were the images. Investigators found photographs of a 3-page document on his phone. It was a manifesto. It referenced Adolf Hitler. It contained anti-Semitic language. It called for the assassination of the sitting president of the United States and possibly the vice president, framing the act as a catalyst for political collapse. It spoke of saving the white race. It spoke of revolution. One excerpt from the manifesto read, "In the cold, breathless logic of a radicalized mind, that removing the president was guaranteed to bring chaos, and that chaos was the point." He had titled another document, recovered on his devices, something along the lines of, "Accelerate the collapse." Federal authorities also found evidence that Nikita had paid for, at least in part, a drone and explosives described in search warrant filings as a weapon of mass destruction. The killings of Tatiana and Donald, according to federal investigators, appeared to have been a means to an end, a way to obtain the financial resources and the freedom necessary to carry out a much larger plan. Classmates who were interviewed by police added more pieces to the picture. One told investigators that Nikita had spoken openly and repeatedly about wanting to kill his parents. She said she had not believed him. She had told him to get help. She had tried to talk him out of it. She said he had told her he had a happy childhood, but that he wanted to know what it felt like to not exist. Another classmate told police that Nikita had mentioned being in contact with someone in Russia, and that he had spoken about plans to overthrow the United States government. These conversations had happened before February 11th. The warning signs had been there. And yet, as is so often the case in these stories, they were dismissed as jokes, as teenage dark humor, as the kind of dramatic thing that teenagers sometimes say and never mean. Sometimes they mean it. Nikita Kasap was charged with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, as well as a series of additional felonies, 2 counts of hiding a corpse, 2 counts of theft, operating a vehicle without consent, intimidating a witness, and 2 counts of identity theft. He was charged as an adult. Bail was set at $1 million. The months that followed were slow and procedural, the way legal proceedings always are, full of motions and continuances and documents filed and documents responded to. Nikita sat in a courtroom and trembled. He was 17 and then 18, aging through his incarceration as the case moved toward its inevitable conclusion. In January of 2026, Nikita Kasap entered a guilty plea. 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. In exchange, prosecutors dismissed the 7 remaining charges. Each homicide count carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison. On March 5th, 2026, Nikita Kasap stood before Judge Ralph Ramirez in Waukesha County Circuit Court to be sentenced. He gave a speech. He was tearful. He said he loved his mother. He said he worried about her constantly, even something as small as watching her reach for something on a high shelf. He said he was not as close with Donald Mayer, but that Mayer had always treated him like a son. And then he said something that prosecutors and observers would carry with them long after the courtroom emptied. He said he had become obsessed with hateful thoughts. He said, "I thought I was part of a revolution. I thought I was part of a war. I told myself bad things had to happen." District Attorney Leslie Bowes told the judge that Nikita Kasap was too dangerous to ever be released. She argued for no possibility of parole. She said that she did not want to take any chances that he might one day be considered rehabilitated. Judge Ramirez called the offenses horrific. He called them inexplicable. He said he did not have a crystal ball that could tell him whether Nikita would ever change or when. And then he handed down 2 life sentences. No parole, no extended supervision, no possibility of release. Nikita Kasap will spend the rest of his natural life in a Wisconsin prison. Let's slow down here for just a moment, because in all of the noise of this case, in the manifestos, in the telegram messages, in the federal investigations, in the courtroom proceedings, it is easy, far too easy, to let Tatiana Kasap fade into the background, to let her become a detail in her own son's story, to let her become a victim in a headline rather than a person in a life. But she was a person. She had a life. She was 35 years old. She had grown up in Moldova, a small country that most Americans could not find on a map, and she had made the brave, exhausting, hopeful decision to leave it. She had come to a country where she did not grow up, where the customs were unfamiliar, where she had to learn and adapt and rebuild herself from the ground up. She had done it with a small child in her arms. She had enrolled in college at an age when many people have already decided that their formal education is behind them. She was building something, she was reaching for something on a high shelf, as her son once said, and he was watching her do it. She had a husband who loved her. She had a dog. She had a home. She had friends and family somewhere who would spend the rest of their lives carrying the weight of how she died. The particular, unbearable weight of knowing that the last image captured of her was a grocery store surveillance photograph. A woman in a winter coat doing an errand on a Tuesday evening. She had a mother, listed in court records as living in Italy now, who would ultimately become the heir to whatever remained of Tatiana's estate, because Wisconsin law sensibly does not allow a killer to inherit from their victim. Tatiana Kasap deserved more than the story she was given. She deserved to finish her degree. She deserved to grow old with Donald. She deserved to watch her son become something other than what he became. She deserved to be the hero of her own story. Instead, she is the victim in his. And that is the cruelest thing about this case. Not the manifesto, not the extremist ideology, not even the cold, calculated planning of the crimes. The cruelest thing is simply this. A woman who gave everything she had to build a safe life for her son died at his hands in her own home on an ordinary Tuesday evening in February. The world is full of stories like this one. Stories that do not have satisfying endings. Stories that leave questions unanswered and hearts unhealed. Stories where the wrong people suffer, and the people who should have been protected were not. But there is something worth carrying with you from this story, even as you drift toward sleep. The people who loved Tatiana Kasap, her mother somewhere in Italy, Donald's mother Judith, the friends and classmates and neighbors who knew them, they are still here, still carrying her, still remembering who she was before the worst night of her life. Tatiana crossed an ocean. She rebuilt herself. She loved fiercely, and she hoped deeply, and she worked hard, and she showed up to class on February 11th, just like she always did, because she was the kind of woman who showed up. That is who she was. Not a headline, not a victim, not a detail in someone else's darkness. She was a woman in a winter coat, reaching for something just out of reach, still trying. If you're still awake and listening, check whether you've left your little goodnight comment. I always check your comments before I sleep too. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Meanwhile, let's move on to our third story. Story 3. The Smiling Widower. The Case of Anthony Lear. Tonight, I am going to tell you a story. A long, slow, carefully told story, drawn from real events, from real people, and from a small island city on the other side of the world, where the night was just as quiet and the streets were just as still as the one you are resting in right now. This is a story about ambition, and about failure, about a marriage that crumbled slowly, like old plaster from a tired wall, about a man who smiled when he should have wept, and who in the end let someone else carry the weight of a decision that was entirely his own. It is a story about a teenager who wanted nothing more than a friend, and found instead something far darker. And it is at its heart a story about the moment when ordinary lives tip quietly into something no one can take back. You do not need to follow every detail with sharp attention. Let the words drift to you like the sound of rain on a rooftop. Let the story carry you. Take a slow breath in, and let it go. Singapore in the year 2001 was a city that never truly slept. It was a place of gleaming towers and narrow side streets, of hawker stalls open past midnight, and the constant low hum of a nation that had built itself, in barely 4 decades, from a colonial trading port into one of the most prosperous and orderly cities in all of Asia. The streets were clean, the rules were strict, and the people by and large moved through their days with a quiet industriousness, trusting in a system that promised safety in exchange for order. It was in this city, somewhere between its ambition and its stillness, that a man named Anthony Lear Tieng was born, sometime around 1967. He was the youngest of 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, raised in a household that did not stay whole for very long. His parents divorced when he was still a child, still soft enough for the fracture to leave a mark, and by most accounts, the young Anthony grew up feeling somewhat adrift. Not violent, not outwardly troubled, just quietly, persistently disconnected from the family around him. He was an average student, the kind who passes through school without leaving much of an impression, studying at River Valley English School and later Thompson Secondary School, before enrolling in a polytechnic for higher education. But even that chapter closed early. His father, who had been paying his fees, eventually refused to continue, and Anthony, without the support or the means to carry on, dropped out in his very first year. He completed his national service, as every young Singaporean man was required to do, and then, rather than leaving, he stayed on. He signed with the Singapore Armed Forces and served for several more years, eventually rising to the rank of second sergeant. Those years gave him structure, a routine, a set of walls to live inside. But when he finally resigned and stepped back into civilian life, the walls came down with him. He tried business. He tried several businesses, in fact, with the kind of restless energy that comes from a man who has too many ideas and not enough patience to grow any single one of them. A graphic design studio, a publishing venture, a modeling agency, each one launched with hope, and each one in time folded quietly into debt. By the late 1990s, Anthony Lear was carrying a financial burden heavy enough to bend a person. But through all of that, through the failures and the mounting debt and the uncertainty, there was one thing that had felt for a while like solid ground. Her name was Annie. Annie Leong Wai Mun was 15 years old the first time Anthony Lear saw her. He was 19, and they met through their church in the way that young people in Singapore often did in those years, through community, through shared spaces, through the ordinary proximity of a Sunday morning in a familiar pew. She was young and quiet, and there was something about her that drew him in. He was older and seemed to know things, seemed to have a sense of direction that she perhaps admired. They began a relationship that lasted 5 years before they married in 1995, when she was 24 and he was around 28. On the face of it, it seemed like a beginning, a real one. They had a daughter together, born on the 13th of April, 1997. A little girl who became, by all accounts, the most uncomplicated thing either of them had ever loved. But behind the front door of their flat, the life they were living was far from calm. Anthony, almost from the beginning, was unfaithful. He had an affair with a woman named Berlinda Ho Wei Lin, a relationship that stretched over 3.5 years. At some point, inexplicably, he allowed Berlinda to move into the flat he shared with Annie and their young daughter. Annie discovered the affair. Anyone who has ever had something precious damaged by someone else's carelessness will understand, in some quiet part of themselves, the particular kind of exhaustion that follows that discovery. Not just the anger, but the long, slow weight of it. And still, Annie stayed. For a while. He had another affair with a woman named Marilyn Tan Su Fen, with whom he had also attempted a business partnership. That ended in the same pattern as everything else Anthony touched, in debt and disappointment and a slow drawing away. Annie, through all of this, had been holding things together with quiet, steady hands. She had left her bank job to help Anthony with one of his businesses. She had used their savings to settle his debts. She had tried again and again to stand beside a man who kept pulling the floor out from under her. In October of 1999, she finally left. She packed up herself and her daughter and moved in with her mother, settling into a housing development board flat in Hugang Avenue 9, on the northeastern edge of the island. It was a small flat, a modest address, but it was hers, and it was honest, and it was safe. The separation, however, did not bring Anthony Lehr any peace, quite the opposite. In August of 2000, around a year after Annie left, Anthony's publishing business collapsed entirely. He was staring down near bankruptcy. The weight of it, the shame of it perhaps, pushed him to a desperate act. He attempted to take his own life by swallowing a large number of sleeping pills and was hospitalized. When Annie heard, she came. She went to him because that is the kind of person she was, and for Lehr, her presence in that hospital room felt like a sign. He believed, or perhaps chose to believe, that the marriage was not over. But Annie did not return to him. She had come out of compassion, not reconciliation. And in February of 2001, she filed formally for divorce. The divorce filing set two things in motion. The first was the legal process, the custody arrangements, the division of assets, the sale of their jointly owned flat. The second was something far darker, stirring quietly inside Anthony Lehr, something that the divorce papers had lit like a slow fuse. He knew he would likely lose custody of his daughter. His debts made that almost certain, and the flat, once sold, would be divided between them, leaving him less than he needed to stay afloat. The life he had imagined, or perhaps the control over a life he had imagined, was slipping entirely beyond his reach. And so Anthony Lehr began to think about a way to keep it all. There is a McDonald's restaurant in Pasir Ris, a quiet residential town on the eastern edge of Singapore, not far from where Anthony Lehr lived. In 2001, Pasir Ris was a suburb of wide green spaces, of low-rise housing blocks and cycling paths that wound along the coastline. It was the kind of neighborhood where teenagers gathered in the evenings simply because there was nowhere else to go, sitting outside fast food restaurants in the warm equatorial air, passing time the way young people do, talking, joking, watching the night go by. In February of 2001, Anthony Lehr began spending time near that McDonald's. He was a man in his mid-30s. He dressed casually, spoke easily, and carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who understood young people, or at least knew how to make them feel understood. He struck up conversations with a group of teenage boys who gathered there regularly. He played the mentor. He bought them things. He listened. He laughed at their jokes and shared his stories, and before long, the boys began to see him as something of an older friend, a guide, a figure of easy authority. There were 5 of them, broadly speaking. There was a 16-year-old dropout named Gavin Jin Wei. There was a 22-year-old named C.T. Za Hao. There was a 19-year-old named Kong Ka Chung. There was a 17-year-old named Vikneswaran Krishnan who went by Vic, and there was a 15-year-old secondary school student, a quiet boy with an IQ of 93, described by those who knew him as simple-minded and trusting. For the purposes of his protection, the courts would later name him only as Z, and Z is what we will call him here. At first, the conversations were ordinary enough, the kind of easy wandering talk you have with a group of teenagers on a warm evening. But then, quite deliberately, Anthony Lehr began to introduce a different subject. He started asking the boys if they would dare to kill someone. He framed it as a game at first, as a hypothetical, the way a provocateur might. He asked how much it would cost. One boy said $1 million, Gavin said 100,000, TZE Howe said 100. The others gave various amounts. Lehr said he agreed to the $100,000 figure. And then, quite calmly, he told them who the target was. His wife, the woman he hated, he said, for keeping him from his daughter, for making his life difficult, for everything. Most of the boys laughed it off. Vicness Warren later told the court that he found it strange and a little disturbing that Ladd brought up killing his wife every time they met. He thought the man was simply unwell. T.Z.E. Howe, the 22-year-old, came to realize Ladd was serious and suggested he hire a professional. Ladd told him he could not find one. Gavin began to understand that something dark was real beneath the casual talk, and he backed away. He tried in his own way to warn Z, but Z was different. Z was 15 years old and impressionable, and Anthony Lair had been building a relationship with him for 5 years. Not the 5 years since the McDonald's meetings, but 5 years altogether since Z had been a child of 10. Lair had, by some accounts, been a presence in Z's life since long before the divorce, since before the plot took any shape. He was someone Z trusted, perhaps one of the first adults outside his family who had ever truly seemed to pay him attention, and Anthony Lair knew exactly how to use that. In the first week of May 2001, Anthony Lear's approach changed. The casual conversations gave way to something more specific, more insistent, more enclosed. He brought Gavin and Z to his flat. He showed them photographs of Annie and of their daughter. He brought out a knife, a long steak knife with a wooden handle, and he told the boys to practice. He demonstrated how it should be done. He showed them the angle of approach, the placement of the hand, the motion of the blade across a throat. He used a rolled newspaper as a prop. He made them rehearse. Gavin, after speaking with a 14-year-old female friend who pleaded with him not to follow through, eventually withdrew. He told Z to back out as well. He was worried. He could see what was happening. But Anthony Lear was not finished with Z. After Gavin pulled away, Lear turned his full attention to the 15-year-old. He pushed harder. He called Z repeatedly on his mobile phone. He reminded him of the money, 100,000 Singapore dollars, enough to change a young life entirely, at least in the imagination of a 15-year-old who did not yet understand what money truly cost. He promised Z a share in his company. He told the boy that he was chosen, that he was trusted, that he was special. And then, when the gentler tools stopped working, he reached for darker ones. He threatened Z. He told the boy that if he did not carry out the killing, he, Anthony Lear, would take Z's life instead. And not just Z's life. He threatened the lives of Z's parents, his siblings, the people the boy loved most in the world. He told Z that he would harm them if Z did not do as he was told. Z was 15 years old. He was not a violent child. He had no history of aggression, no criminal record, no darkness in him that had ever surfaced before this. He was a boy who wanted to take his GCE N-level examinations that year. He was a boy who loved his parents. He was a boy who had, entirely by the accident of a McDonald's car park and a grown man's loneliness, ended up in a room where there seemed to be no door. The first attempt came on the 10th of May, 2001. Anthony Lear drove Z to Hogang Avenue 9, to the block of flats where Annie lived with her mother and their daughter. He instructed Z to wear a helmet to hide his face. He gave him the knife. He told him to go to the 4th floor, to wait, and to do what had been practiced. Z went, he climbed the stairs. He saw a woman getting out of a taxi below and called Lear to ask for a description. Lear told him. Z moved toward the lift lobby of the 4th floor, but he missed her. And then coming out of the flat, Annie appeared with her daughter, the small girl, walking toward the playground. Z stood there on the landing, looking at a mother and her child, and he could not move. He could not do it. He went back. The second attempt came on the 11th of May. Z arrived at the block again, helmet in hand. He placed the helmet on a parked motorcycle in the car park below, deciding quietly in that moment that he was done, that he would not do this. And then his phone rang. It was Lear. Lear talked to him, pushed him, and once again Z climbed the stairs. Once again he reached the 4th floor. And once again, Annie was not alone. He saw her in the playground with Anthony Lear himself and their daughter, the three of them together, and something in the image broke whatever resolve Lear had rebuilt in him. He went back. It had not happened. After 2 failed attempts, Anthony Lear was no longer patient. He told Z that there would be no turning back. He told him that the threats were real, that the consequences of failure were worse than the consequences of following through. For the next 2 days, Z stayed away from Lair entirely. It was Mother's Day weekend, and Z spent it with his own mother, as normal a thing as he could find to hold on to. But on the 13th of May, 2001, he went back to Lair's flat. Lair had been calling him, Persistently, repeatedly, the way that controlling people call, not to speak but to assert presence, to remind a person that they cannot simply disappear. Z answered and went, and at the flat, Lur rehearsed the plan one final time. He also mentioned, almost in passing, that earlier that day he had gone to see Annie and their daughter, and that he had tried to do the killing himself, but had not been able to find the opportunity. Z later wrote in his confession that hearing this made him feel something like relief. Perhaps Lear would do it himself. Perhaps it would be over. It was not over. On the 14th of May, at around 9 in the evening, Z returned to Lear's flat once more. They rehearsed. Lear wrapped the knife in a page of newspaper, a torn page from a copy of the new paper dated the 23rd of April. He passed it to Z. Z tucked it into the waistband of his jeans. They took a bus together to Hogang. At some point the two separated. Lear called Z and told him to wait at a specific spot on the 5th floor landing of Block 923, Hogang Avenue 9. He told him that Annie would be coming home alone that night, that their daughter would not be with her. Z waited. Around 10 in the evening, Lear called again. He told Z that Annie had just arrived home. Annie Leong Wai Mun, 30 years old, had stepped out of the lift on the 4th floor of her block and was walking toward her mother's flat. She had had an ordinary day. She was a real estate agent, young and capable, with a quiet life ahead of her and a daughter she was raising with everything she had. She walked the familiar corridor toward home. Z came from behind. He was not a large boy, not an imposing one. He was 15 years old and wearing plain clothes, and his hands were shaking. He attacked her from behind, slashing her across the neck with the knife and then stabbing her in the chest. Annie screamed. Her mother, Madame Chin Shui Ling, who was inside the flat, heard the sound and rushed out. She found her daughter collapsed in the corridor, bleeding. Z ran. He bolted down the stairs and out of the block into the warm Singapore night. He took a taxi toward the beach with the knife still wrapped in its torn newspaper, and he disposed of it somewhere in the water. And on the way, sitting alone in the back of that taxi with the sounds of the city passing by outside the window, he began to cry. He would later write that he regretted it, even then. That he wished with everything inside him that he had never known Anthony Lear. Annie Leong was taken to Tan Tock Seng Hospital. She died from her injuries hours later. She was 30 years old. Her daughter was 4. The news of Annie Leong's death broke quickly through her family and community, and within hours, word reached the police and the investigation began. Anthony Lear, learning that his wife was dead, went to the hospital. He went to the wake. He played the role of a grieving husband with the kind of careful, studied performance that, to those who did not know him, might have passed for real. He spoke about being devastated. He shook his head at the tragedy of it all, but police investigators experienced in the particular language of people who were hiding something found his manner strange. When questioned in the early hours of the 15th of May, Lear's answers were evasive, inconsistent, a little too controlled. He said the right words, but not in the right order. Something was off. Then came the forensics. At the scene of the murder, investigators found something small and ordinary and damning. A torn piece of newspaper. The weapon had been wrapped in it. The page was from a copy of the new paper, dated the 23rd of April. When police searched Lear's flat 2 days later, they found the matching half of that same torn newspaper. A page torn down the middle. One half at the scene of a murder. The other half in the home of the dead woman's husband. On Anthony Lear's computer, investigators found something else. A Microsoft Word document containing a simulated conversation dated the 17th of May, in which a character communicated phrases like, "Payment might have to wait." It was a fabricated exchange constructed to look like a back and forth between two people, written by one person. Lear had been preparing a cover story, or perhaps practicing one, in the days after the murder. Meanwhile, word of what had truly happened was already moving through the group of teenagers who had been gathered outside that McDonald's for months. 2 days after the murder, Z called his 16-year-old friend and told him what he had done. The friend, frightened, eventually told others. By the 18th of May, Z was in police custody. He gave his confession within the hour, a long handwritten account, steady in its detail, full of grief. He described everything. He described Lear's flat and the rehearsals and the knife wrapped in newspaper. He described the bus ride and the phone calls and the feeling of standing on that staircase landing and waiting for a woman to come home. And he described Anthony Lear. Later that same day, Anthony Lear was arrested and charged with abetment of murder. The trial of Anthony Lear and the boy known as Z opened on the 19th of November, 2001 in the High Court of Singapore. It was heard before Judicial Commissioner Tay Yong Kwang, a precise and deeply thoughtful jurist who would go on to become one of Singapore's most respected judges. The prosecution was led by Deputy Public Prosecutors Lo Chung Yao and Edwin San Ong Kiar. Anthony Lear was represented by one of Singapore's most celebrated criminal defense lawyers, a man named Subhas Anandin, who was known across the island for his tenacity and his humanity in equal measure. Z was represented by Edwin C. Lee Ming and Peter Ong Lip Cheng. The courtroom was packed. Singaporeans followed this case the way they followed few others, not out of morbid fascination alone, but out of a kind of stunned disbelief. A man had convinced a 15-year-old child to kill his wife. A 15-year-old child had done it, and the man, the adult in the equation, the one who had conceived and planned and rehearsed and directed the whole thing, had done so with such calculated coldness that the city found itself struggling to attach a familiar shape to what he had become. Throughout the proceedings, Anthony Lear wore a smile. It was noted by journalists, by court observers, by Subhas Anandan himself in his memoir. Not a smile of nervousness, not the uncomfortable grimace of a man trying to hold himself together. A strange, steady, almost contented smile, as though the proceedings were mildly amusing to him, or as though he were watching a play in which the outcome did not particularly concern him. He maintained from beginning to end that it had all been a game of bluff. He insisted he had never actually intended for anyone to kill Annie. He said he had been surprised when Z took him seriously. He said the whole thing had spiraled out of control, that he had been a man talking nonsense in the heat of marital frustration, not a man giving a contract to a child. Judicial Commissioner Tay did not believe him. The evidence was overwhelming and specific. The torn newspaper matched. The Microsoft Word document existed. Z's confession was detailed and internally consistent. Multiple witnesses from the teenage group described, separately and in substantial agreement, the weeks of conversations at the McDonald's, the visits to Lur's flat, the rehearsals with the knife, the offers of money. Berlinda Ho, Lur's former mistress of 3.5 years, testified that Lur had spoken often and seriously about killing his wife, and had threatened Berlinda herself on multiple occasions. She said that when Annie raised the idea of divorce, Lur had become, in her words, unhinged. And then there was Z's handwritten confession, reproduced in part in the court documents and later in the Straits Times collection of Singapore's most notable crimes. In his own words, a 15-year-old boy described what it had been like to be slowly, deliberately shaped into a weapon. He described the rehearsals without emotion, the practical facts of them, the newspaper and the knife and the photographs of a woman he had never met. He described waiting on that staircase and the phone ringing and running away afterward. He described the taxi ride to the beach and the knife going into the water. And he wrote at the end of his confession that he really regretted doing it, even at this point of time while writing this. Judicial Commissioner Tay, in his judgment, described Z as a morose and mortified teenager still trying to come to terms with the cataclysmic events of those preceding months. He said he saw no mean miniature monster in him. He detected no vengeful or vicious spirit in the boy. He understood that Z had been manipulated, threatened, and ultimately broken into compliance by a man who had spent 5 years building the trust necessary to make such compliance possible. Of Lear, the judge was far less gentle. He described the case as a death match on the chessboard of reality, in which the boys had been used as pawns. He found Lear guilty of abetment of murder, having conceived, planned, and directed the killing of Annie Leong with deliberate intent and calculated cruelty. On the 5th of December 2001, Anthony Lear was sentenced to death. Z, who had been found guilty of murder but could not be sentenced to death due to his age, was ordered to be detained indefinitely during the president's pleasure. Subhas Anandan, Lur's defense lawyer, filed an appeal against the death sentence. It was heard before 3 of Singapore's most senior judges in the Court of Appeal: Chief Justice Yong Pung Hao, Judge of Appeal Chow Hick Tin, and High Court Judge Tanley Meng. On the 4th of March 2002, the appeal was dismissed. Ler then filed a clemency petition with the president of Singapore. That too was rejected. In the weeks between his failed appeal and his scheduled execution, Anthony Ler made one final gesture to his lawyer. He offered to donate his kidneys to Subhas Anandan, who was dealing with health problems of his own. Subhas declined, but recalled the offer in his memoir with something that was neither warmth nor coldness, simply acknowledgement. The strange last act of a man who had always wanted to be seen as generous, even when nothing else about him had been. On the 13th of December 2002, Anthony Ler Wee Ting was executed by hanging at Changi Prison. He was the only one who died for what happened on the 14th of May, 2001. The boy the courts named Z spent the years that followed inside Queenstown Remand Prison and then in other facilities within Singapore's correctional system. He studied. He sat his GCE N-level examinations, the same ones he had been preparing for when the whole terrible episode began. He passed them, he continued, he sat his O-levels, he sat his A-levels, he earned a university degree. By all accounts that emerged over the years, he worked with a quiet, steady seriousness, building an interior life in the only way left open to him. He was deeply remorseful. This was not the performance of remorse that sometimes emerges from people who understand that remorse is what is expected of them. It was noted by the people who worked with him, assessed him, counseled him over the years, a genuine and continuous grief for what he had done to a woman he had never known, and to a little girl who lost her mother when she was 4 years old. In 2013, Z submitted a clemency petition to then-President Tony Tan. It was denied. In 2017, at around 31 years of age, he submitted a second petition to President Halimah Yacob. On the 2nd of November 2018, after 17 years in detention, Z was released. He had been granted clemency by the President of Singapore. He walked out into a city that had changed enormously since the night he had walked into it carrying a knife wrapped in newspaper. Annie Leong's mother, Madam Chin Shui Ling, who had held her daughter in that corridor 17 years before and had never left the flat where it happened, told a family friend that she bore no bitterness toward Z's release. She was not without sorrow. She would never be without sorrow. But she was without vengeance, which is perhaps its own quiet kind of courage. Z's own parents, who had never stopped loving him, who had visited him through all those years, were there when he came out. Annie Leong's daughter was 4 years old when she lost her mother. Her name has never been made public. She has been protected deliberately and carefully by the system that handled her parents' case and by the family that raised her. She grew up in the care of people who loved her. She grew up, presumably, knowing what had happened and growing old enough at some point to understand it. There are things the public record does not contain. We do not know what it was like for her, as a child and then a young woman, to carry the knowledge that her father had arranged the death of her mother. We do not know how she speaks of it, or whether she speaks of it at all. We do not know what she keeps and what she has let go. She was 4 years old. That is all we know for certain of how she began the story. There is something that sits with you after a story like this one. Not horror, exactly, not the sharp, jagged feeling of something sudden and violent. Something quieter than that. The way certain kinds of sadness settle, slowly, like dust after a long disturbance. The image of a woman walking down a corridor toward home, not knowing that her ordinary evening was the last one she would ever have. The image of a 15-year-old boy sitting in the back of a taxi, crying, already understanding the full enormity of what he had done and could never undo. The image of a 4-year-old girl, too young to understand, too old to escape the shape that day would leave on the rest of her life. And the image, somehow the most difficult of all, of a man in a courtroom, smiling. Anthony Ler was not a monster in the cinematic sense. He was not a figure of obvious menace. He was a man who failed at business and at fidelity and at honesty and at the small steady work of being a decent person, and who, when the consequences of those failures came toward him in the form of a divorce and a custody hearing and a flat sale, decided that the simplest solution was to remove the person who represented the problem. He recruited a child to do it. He trained him, threatened him, and sent him out with a knife. And then he smiled. The case of Anthony Ler remains one of the most discussed true crime cases in Singapore's history. one of the 25 cases selected by the Straits Times as having most profoundly shaken the nation since its independence in 1965. It has been reconstructed in television documentaries, dramatized in crime series, written about in legal journals, and revisited each time Singapore examines the question of what it means to hold a person accountable for a crime they planned but did not physically commit. The answer in this case was clear. Anthony Lear wrote the murder, as the judge put it, with all the precision of a man who understood what he was doing. The fact that someone else's hands held the knife did not diminish the authorship. And now the story is told. You can let it settle, slowly, somewhere at the back of your mind, with all the other stories you carry. The facts of the world, the complexity of people, the strangeness of lives that begin so ordinarily and end so differently from the way anyone imagined. Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our fourth story. Story 4. The Girl Who Never Made It to School. The Murder of Madeline Soto. Tonight I am going to tell you a story, one that took place not so long ago, in the warm, sun-soaked state of Florida. A story about a little girl with a love for the color purple, a girl who carried her whole world inside a pink dinosaur blanket, and a girl whose disappearance on an otherwise ordinary Monday morning shook an entire community to its core. This is the story of Madeline Soto. Take a slow breath in and let it go. We are going to take this one quiet step at a time. Madeline Sophia Soto was born on the 22nd of February in the year 2011 in the state of Florida. She was known to almost everyone who loved her simply as Maddie. She was a 7th grader at Hunters Creek Middle School, a school nestled in the community of Kissimmee, Florida, not far from the glittering lights and towering castles of Walt Disney World. Kissimmee is a place that carries a certain kind of magic in the air, a place where tourists flood the roads and the warm Florida sun seems to drape itself over everything in a golden haze. It is a place where the extraordinary and the ordinary exist side by side, where the mundane moments of everyday life play out in the shadow of something larger, something louder. Maddie lived in that in-between space, in a condominium off Hoagland Boulevard, in a life that was quieter and more complicated than most people knew. Maddie had turned 13 years old just 4 days before everything changed. On the 22nd of February, 2024, she had celebrated her birthday, and then on the 25th, a Sunday, she celebrated again with family. By all accounts, it was a happy occasion, a rare, uncomplicated kind of joy in what had often been, for her, a complicated home life. Maddie was a child with energy, with a vivid inner world, and with the kind of quiet, searching eyes that belong to children who have seen more than they should. She had been diagnosed with ADHD and was known to be a bit forgetful, a bit scattered in the gentle, endearing way of many 13-year-olds. She loved the color purple. Her iPhone was purple. She owned a pink dinosaur blanket that she curled under at night. She had friends at school, friends she texted and confided in, and she had dreams, quiet, adolescent dreams that she whispered to those friends in the way that young girls do. In one of those whispered conversations discovered later by investigators scrolling through her phone, Maddie had told a friend that when she turned 18, she wanted to live in the woods. It was an offhand comment, perhaps a fantasy, perhaps a longing, perhaps just the kind of thing a young girl says when she wants to feel free. It would become, in the days after her disappearance, one of the small, heartbreaking details that investigators would cling to, searching for meaning in every word she had ever typed. Maddie lived with her mother, Jennifer Soto, in a 4-bedroom condominium. The apartment was shared with at least 2 roommates, and from time to time with Jennifer's long-term on and off again boyfriend, a man named Stephen Michael Stearns. Despite the size of the apartment, Maddie did not have her own bedroom. She slept in the living room, behind a flimsy partition that separated her makeshift space from the rest of the communal area. Her pink blanket, her purple phone, a small corner of a busy, crowded world. Her friends at school would later say that Maddie often came to class with redness around her eyes, that she had arrived crying on more than one occasion, visibly upset about things at home. She was a child navigating waters that were far too deep for someone her age, in a household that carried its own invisible currents of tension and uncertainty. And at the center of all of it, moving quietly through the background of her life for years, was Stephen Stearns. Stephen Michael Stearns was born on the 25th of April in the year 1986, which made him 37 years old at the time of the events in this story. He had been in a relationship with Jennifer Soto for several years, the kind of on and off arrangement that never quite ended and never quite committed, that drifted back and forth depending on circumstance and need. By many accounts, Stearns was not a man who presented as obviously dangerous. He was not someone who announced himself. He was simply, quietly there, lingering at the edges of family life, present enough to be familiar, distant enough to remain unknowable. He had no steady employment at the time. He slept a great deal, according to people who knew the household. Both he and Jennifer, friends and family would say, were prone to low periods, to days where the weight of the world seemed to press them both flat, and when one of them suffered, the other often sank alongside them. Stearns' own parents, when later interviewed by investigators, did not hide their concerns about their son's relationship with Jennifer. They disapproved of the pairing, citing what they described as drug use and Jennifer's ongoing struggles with depression and anxiety. They worried, they said, that the two of them dragged each other down. Stearns' father went further, suggesting that the dynamic between his son and Jennifer was unhealthy, that when one of them was struggling, they pulled the other deeper into darkness rather than lifting each other up. And yet, despite all of this, despite the tension and the instability, Stearns remained in that household. He had a room of his own on the upper floor of the condominium, while Jennifer slept downstairs, and Maddie, behind her partition in the living room, was somewhere in between. What investigators would later uncover about the years that Stearns spent in that household is almost impossible to describe without the weight of it pressing down on every word. Because the abuse that Maddie suffered at his hands did not begin in the weeks before her death. It did not begin the year before, or the year before that. According to the evidence eventually recovered from Stearns' phone and from his Google Drive account, the sexual abuse of Madeline Soto had begun when she was just 8 years old. 8 years old. For approximately 5 years, this child had been victimized in the place she was supposed to call home, by a man who was supposed to be a trusted adult in her life, by her mother's partner, the person who was sometimes described, by Jennifer herself, as someone who treated Maddie like a daughter. The full weight of that betrayal is something that does not arrive all at once. It settles slowly, like the kind of cold that creeps in not through a gust of wind, but through the slow, persistent chill of a long winter night. On the morning of Monday, the 26th of February, 2024, Madeline Soto woke up in her makeshift bedroom in the living room of the Kissimmee condominium, on what would be the last morning of her life. The night before had been, by all accounts, unsettling. One of the roommates in the house later told investigators that she had heard sounds coming from the upstairs bedroom, where, according to what Jennifer later told police, Maddie had gone to sleep that night alongside Stephen Stearns, while Jennifer herself slept downstairs in her own room. The roommate described what she heard as noises that she could not quite categorize, sounds that left her uneasy in the way that many things in that household left people uneasy, noticed but not spoken. By the morning of the 26th, Jennifer was preparing for the day. She told investigators she last saw Maddie around 8 in the morning getting ready for school. Maddie was dressed and seemed ready to go. Stephen would drop her off. It was, Jennifer said, an arrangement that occurred from time to time, though at least one roommate later noted to investigators that she had never, in all her time living in that house, seen Stephen take Maddie to school. At some point that morning, Maddie left the apartment with Stephen Stearns. She left behind her phone. Jennifer and Stefan would later tell investigators that this was because Maddie had simply forgotten it, which was not unusual given her ADHD. But when investigators examined that purple iPhone later, they would find something else, something quieter and sadder than a forgotten school day. Text messages between Maddie and her friends, messages in which she had talked at various points about her life, about her feelings, about the way things were at home. Surveillance cameras at the apartment complex, the kind of quiet, ever-watching eyes that exist in parking lots and hallways and on the corners of buildings, captured Stephen Stearns driving his silver 2010 Lincoln MKZ out of the complex that morning at 7:50 in the morning. The footage showed him leaving and then returning, not once but several times, between 7:50 and 8:31 in the morning. And in the footage from at least one of those passes, something deeply disturbing was visible in the passenger seat of his car. A figure in a green sweatshirt, head slumped over to one side, completely still. Not sleeping, not napping, not leaning against the window the way a drowsy teenager might on the way to school. Still, and at 7:30 that same morning, before many of those passes were even complete, surveillance footage captured Stephen Stearns at a dumpster in the Venetian Bay apartment complex, wearing a red shirt and tan pants, carrying 2 large white trash bags, and throwing them inside. Inside those bags, as investigators would later discover, were Maddie's backpack and her school-issued laptop. He never drove her to school. At the point that he was throwing her belongings into a dumpster at 7:30 in the morning, Madeline Soto was almost certainly already gone. The school day passed. Hunters Creek Middle School recorded Madeline Soto as absent for every single period of the day. Not one teacher checked her name off in the morning. Not one bell rang that she was present for. She was simply, quietly not there. At around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Jennifer Soto arrived at the school to pick her daughter up. She waited, she looked around, she did not see Maddie. She drove to her own mother's place of work, thinking perhaps Maddie had gone there instead. Maddie was not there either. She called friends, she circled the neighborhood, and at 8 o'clock that evening, Jennifer Soto filed a missing persons report with the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Deputies arrived and began a canvass of the area. They brought a bloodhound through the neighborhood surrounding the school, following any trace of a scent. They came up empty. Madeline Soto was gone. The following morning, the story reached the news. Jennifer spoke to reporters. She appeared on a Zoom call with a local television station, visibly distraught, pleading for information about her daughter. And there, in the background of that interview, barely noticeable but present in the way that he so often was, barely visible through the frame of the camera, was Stephen Stearns. Investigators were already watching him closely. When detectives sat down to interview Stearns on the 27th, he told them a story. He said he had driven Maddie toward the school that morning, and that she had asked him to drop her off a block away, near a church on Town Loop Boulevard, because she was embarrassed to be seen arriving in his old Lincoln. He said she had gotten out of the car, walked toward the school, and that was the last he saw of her. He said she seemed fine. He said he thought nothing of it. Investigators listened carefully. They asked questions. They circled back. And they noticed something that experienced detectives always notice in situations like this: the way a story shifts when it is being constructed rather than remembered. On one pass, Stearns said Maddie had been awake and alert in the car. On another, a newly released interview showed him describing her as asleep in the passenger seat, leaning back, he said, just kinda conked out napping, with the seat reclined. These were not small inconsistencies. A child who was alert and walking into school, and a child who was asleep and reclined in the passenger seat, are two very different images. They cannot both be true. And then investigators checked the surveillance footage, the license plate readers, the traffic cameras that dotted the roads of Kissimmee and the surrounding area like silent witnesses to every movement, every turn, every unexplained detour. Stephen Stearns never drove toward Hunters Creek Middle School that morning. He never dropped Madeline off near any church. His car had moved in entirely different directions, passing through routes that led away from the school rather than toward it. By the time Jennifer was waiting at dismissal, Maddie had not been at that school for a single moment of the day. On the 28th of February, 2 days after Maddie disappeared, Stephen Stearns gave investigators his consent to search his phone. He handed it over willingly, cooperatively, with the composure of someone who had already taken steps to cover his tracks. He explained that he had accidentally performed a factory reset on the phone on the 26th, the same morning Maddie vanished. He said he had been trying to update it. It had been an accident. It happens. What investigators discovered, however, was that the phone had been factory reset not once but twice within the same 12-hour window. A factory reset on a modern smartphone is not an accident. It requires the user to navigate through settings, through a general management menu, through a reset submenu, and through a confirmation prompt. It requires deliberate step-by-step intention. It requires a person to mean to do it. The digital forensics unit got to work. And what they found in the recovered data of that phone and in the linked Google Drive account was a record of horror that reached back years. Photographs, videos, images and recordings that documented the sexual abuse of Madeline Soto from the time she was 8 years old. Evidence of crimes that had been committed repeatedly inside the walls of that Kissimmee condominium, in the house where Maddie had lived and slept and gone to school from and come home to, year after year after year. And there was more. Buried in the search history of that phone, investigators found queries for a drug called sevoflurane. Sevoflurane is a volatile anesthetic, a substance used in surgical settings that induces hypnosis and amnesia. Someone had been searching for information about it. The implication of that search, in the context of everything else investigators were finding, did not require much imagination to understand. When Stearns was later jailed, a recorded conversation between him and one of his relatives offered what may have been the closest thing to an admission. In that call, when a relative pressed him, told him that he had participated in what had happened, Stearns replied simply, "Yeah." And when the relative asked how the whole situation had come about, Stearns said something even more chilling. He said, "I didn't start it." 3 words that inverted the reality of everything, that attempted to place the responsibility for years of abuse on the shoulders of a child. A child who had been 8 years old when it began, who had no power, no language, no framework for what was being done to her, and no one in the home who was fighting to stop it. In the days following Madeline's disappearance, the community of Kissimmee came together in a way that communities do in moments of collective grief and fear. Flyers went up all over downtown Kissimmee. The image on those flyers was a school photograph, the kind of photo every parent keeps. A young girl with dark hair and a gentle expression, the kind of face that makes a stranger feel as though they know her. The Orange County Sheriff's Office launched a massive search operation. Over 100 personnel were deployed, including deputies, detectives, bloodhounds, intelligence analysts, and specialized search teams. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement added Madeline to their missing child alerts, listing her as endangered, a classification used for children believed to be at risk of harm from a predatory situation. Sheriff John Mina spoke at a press conference with the gravity of a man carrying more information than he could yet share. He said that investigators had accessed Maddie's phone and found the messages she had sent to friends about wanting to live in the woods when she turned 18. This led search teams into wooded areas behind Hunters Creek Middle School and throughout the surrounding region. But as the hours became days and the search teams came up empty-handed, the tone of the investigation began to shift. On the 28th, Stephen Stearns was arrested, not yet for anything directly connected to Maddie's disappearance, but on charges of sexual battery and possession of child sexual abuse material, based on what forensic investigators had discovered on his phone. He was taken to the Orange County Jail. He refused to make a first court appearance. He said nothing useful. He offered nothing. Jennifer Soto, meanwhile, was staying at a hotel near Walt Disney World with Stearns and his father, as the condominium was being investigated. Those who observed her during this time described her as believing, genuinely or otherwise, that Stephen was the wrong guy, that investigators were making a mistake, that her daughter would be found. It was only when detectives showed her the surveillance photograph of Maddie slumped in the passenger seat of Stearns' car, motionless and pale, that Jennifer Soto went silent for a long moment, and then began to cry. She was asked directly by investigators if she believed Stearns was responsible. She said, "At this point I do." On the 1st of March, 2024, 5 days after Madeline Soto had last been seen alive, the Osceola County Sheriff's Office found her body. She was discovered in a wooded area east of the small town of St. Cloud, in Osceola County, not far from Pearl Lake. along a remote stretch near Hickory Tree Road. She was lying in the grass of a secluded, overgrown place, the kind of area that a person would only know how to find if they had driven those roads deliberately, if they had scouted that terrain with a specific, purposeful intent. Investigators noted immediately that the bottoms of her socks were clean. She had not walked there, she had been carried. The investigation shifted in that moment from a missing persons case to a homicide. When detectives arrived at Jennifer Soto's door that evening to tell her what they had found, she reportedly received the news in silence at first, before grief arrived, slowly and heavily, the way it does when a part of a person already knows what they are being told. In the days that followed, the Orange County Medical Examiner conducted an examination of Madeline's body. The findings, released publicly in late March of 2024, were devastating and unambiguous. Madeline Soto had died by strangulation. The right portion of her hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped bone at the base of the tongue that often fractures in cases of manual strangulation, was not intact. Her death was classified as a homicide. Investigators believe that Madeline had already been dead when the surveillance cameras captured her slumped in the passenger seat of Stern's car that morning, as he drove through Kissimmee, making pass after pass through the complex. They believe she died in the hours of that final night, in the upstairs bedroom of that condominium, while her mother slept downstairs. They believe Stephen Stern strangled her, drove through the early Florida morning with her body in the car beside him, threw her belongings into a dumpster, and then drove to a remote stretch of land east of St. Cloud, where he left her in the grass. Then he went home. Then he sat for a day and a half in a hotel near the most magical place on earth. Then he gave police his phone. In the aftermath of the discovery of Maddie's body, the full scale of what Stephen Stearns had done began to emerge in layers, each one darker than the last. On the morning of Maddie's disappearance, while she was reportedly missing and her mother was telling the world she had last been seen getting ready for school, surveillance footage placed Stearns at a specific location, the Venetian Bay apartment complex dumpster, at 7:30 in the morning, carrying 2 large white trash bags. Inside one of those bags was Maddie's backpack. Inside another was her school-issued laptop. He had stripped her of the evidence of her daily life and thrown it away before he had even finished the rest of what he needed to do. Traffic cameras and license plate readers, those quiet and impartial witnesses of every road in Central Florida, traced his movements across the day. His silver Lincoln MKZ appeared on John Young Parkway, moving south. It appeared again on roads that curved east toward St. Cloud. It mapped, like a silent, damning trail of breadcrumbs, the path from the apartment to the dumpster, to the wooded stretch of land near Pearl Lake where Maddie's body was eventually found. On the night of the 27th, while the search for Maddie was ongoing and he was supposedly staying with Jennifer and his father at the hotel, Stearns quietly slipped out, alone, in the middle of the night and drove across the state to North Port, where his parents lived. He was gone for hours. When investigators later asked why, he was vague and evasive, giving an answer that circled itself without ever landing anywhere. Investigators believe he was attempting to access his Google account from his parents' home internet connection, to log in and delete the photographs and videos stored in his Google Drive, the images he had not been able to scrub from the cloud when he wiped his phone. He was unsuccessful. He could not get in. His father, according to investigators, later contacted the North Port Police Department and turned over an old computer tower that had been found in Stephen's former bedroom while cleaning. Investigators also discovered a USB drive, recovered from a storage unit connected to the case, that contained over 35,000 images of child pornography. 35,000. In that same storage unit were a hard drive and other materials, though the hard drive itself appeared not to have been used since 2020 and yielded no additional evidence. The totality of what was found amounted, eventually, to 60 criminal charges against Stephen Stearns, 40 counts of unlawful possession of materials depicting the sexual performance of a child, 8 counts of capital sexual battery on a child under the age of 12, 5 counts of sexual battery against someone between the ages of 12 and 18, 7 counts of lewd or lascivious molestation, and first-degree premeditated murder. In April of 2024, a grand jury indicted Stearns on the murder charge. By June of that year, the state attorney's office announced that it would seek the death penalty. For over a year, the case moved through the courts with the slow, deliberate weight of the legal process. Stearns pleaded not guilty to all charges. His attorneys filed motions to suppress evidence, arguing that the phone search had not been conducted with a warrant. They argued against the death penalty. They sought to close court hearings to the public. None of it held. A judge ruled that the phone evidence was admissible. The death penalty remained on the table, and the public watched. Then, on the 21st of July, 2025, in a Kissimmee courtroom, Stephen Michael Stearns stood before a judge and entered a plea. He pleaded no contest to first-degree premeditated murder. He pleaded guilty to 20 counts of sex crimes. In doing so, he avoided the trial that had been scheduled and avoided the possibility of execution. The plea deal had been reached, prosecutors said, in close coordination with Maddie's family. Later that same afternoon, Osceola County Circuit Judge Keith Karsten sentenced Stephen Stearns to 21 concurrent life sentences in state prison, with no possibility of parole. He will never leave prison. He will die within those walls, carrying with him the full weight of every violation, every abuse, every moment of terror he inflicted on a child who had no one powerful enough to protect her. No contest to murder means he did not formally admit guilt for the killing, but he did not deny it either. And in the courtroom that day, the family of Madeline Soto was present, and they spoke. Maddie's father, Tyler Wallace, had not been a primary presence in her daily life, something he acknowledged in his statement to the court. He was a man who, by his own words, had wanted to be more a part of her life, who had grieved not only the daughter he lost, but the future with her that he would never have. He stood before the judge and addressed Stephen Stearns directly. He said he could not grasp the selfishness of what Stearns had done. He called him depraved. He called him weak. He called him a coward. And then he said something that carried the particular devastating truth of grief that has no endpoint. It doesn't heal with time. Because of what you did, he told Stearns, I will never meet the woman she was becoming. Maddie's maternal grandmother, Yolanda Zambrano, who had been by all accounts a second mother to the girl, submitted a letter that was read aloud in court by a prosecutor. She described herself as carrying a broken soul. She said that Stearns had betrayed Maddie's love, her trust, her innocence, her body. And then she said, if that wasn't enough damage, he took her life. And with her, he killed a piece of our souls. State Attorney Monique Worrell, standing before the cameras after the sentencing, said that Madeline's life had been stolen in a senseless act of violence. She was careful with her words, as lawyers often are, but the weight beneath them was clear. Madeline Soto had not simply been a victim of a single act of violence. She had been a child whose life had been stolen, piece by piece over the course of years, in a place where she should have been safe, by a person who had been allowed to remain in her world long after he should have been gone from it. There is one detail from this case that I have returned to many times. In the quiet hours, when the facts of a story settle and the human weight of it begins to be felt rather than just understood. When Stephen Stearns drove to that dumpster on the morning of February 26, 2024, before the rest of the world had woken up to the fact that Maddie was missing, he threw away her backpack, he threw away her school laptop, he threw away the ordinary objects of a 13-year-old girl's school day. The things she carried because she was a student, because she was supposed to be going somewhere, because she had a whole day ahead of her. He threw them away. He did not throw them away in a panic. He drove to that dumpster deliberately. He parked, he got out, he lifted the bags, he put them inside. He got back in his car, with Maddie still in the passenger seat, slumped and still and wearing her green sweatshirt, and he drove away. In one of the evidence photographs taken by investigators inside the Kissimmee condominium during the search of the property, among the items cataloged and removed was a pink dinosaur blanket and a purple comforter, the things a 13-year-old girl puts on her bed, in her corner of the living room, in the apartment that was never entirely hers but that she had tried to make feel like home. Those small, soft, ordinary things, the color of childhood and comfort and sleep. Maddie never came home to them again. Madeline Soto was 13 years old. She had just turned 13 4 days before she was killed. She had a birthday, and she had cake, and she had family around her, and she went to sleep that night the way children do, in the ordinary, unremarkable way, without knowing it was one of the last times. Her story is not just a story about violence, or about crime, or about the failures of those who should have protected her. It is a story about a girl, about a purple phone and a pink blanket and a corner of a living room that she called her own, about a child who told her friends she wanted to live in the woods someday, who came to school with red-rimmed eyes and still showed up, who was a seventh grader and a birthday girl and a daughter and a granddaughter who was loved and who deserved so much more than the life she was given. She deserved to grow up. Stephen Michael Stearns will spend every remaining day of his life in a Florida state prison. He will wake up behind those walls, and he will go to sleep behind those walls, and he will never again be free. That is the only justice the law could offer for what he took. Maddie's family carries her forward, her grandmother with her broken soul that still breathes and still remembers. Her father, who will never meet the woman she was becoming. The friends who knew her, the classmates who made the memorial outside her school when they learned what had happened, who left flowers and rosaries and stuffed animals at the edge of the road where she was found, who cried for a girl they may not have known but recognized as one of their own. She was one of us, she was a child, and she mattered. Settle in now wherever you are. Let your breath slow, and let your body rest. Tonight we remembered Madeline Soto. We said her name, and in saying it, we carry her a little further into the world. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. The Case of Esther Estepa. Tonight, we are going to talk about something real. Something that happened not so long ago, in a sun-drenched corner of southern Europe, where the cobblestones are warm to the touch, and the sea breeze carries the smell of salt and orange blossom. A place where strangers meet at hostels, share meals, swap stories, and walk roads together that twist through ancient landscapes. It is a story about a woman who loved life with everything she had. A woman who wandered, who explored, who carried her home on her back like a gentle pilgrim, moving from city to city, sleeping beneath unfamiliar ceilings, finding beauty in small, quiet things. Her name was Esther Estepa, and in the summer of 2023 she disappeared. Tonight we trace her steps, slowly and carefully. We honor who she was. We follow her family, who refused to stop searching even when everyone else did. And we look at the man who walked beside her in those final days, a man with a smile for the camera and something very dark hidden behind it. Esther Estepa was 42 years old when she disappeared. She was born in the early 1980s, a Seville woman through and through, raised in the warm amber light of Andalusia, that wide and ancient region of southern Spain where flamenco echoes down tiled alleys and summers stretch long and golden into September. She was the kind of woman people remembered, not because she was loud, but because she was present, warm, genuinely curious about the people she met. She had a laugh that people who knew her describe as infectious, the kind that fills a room and lingers after she has left. Esther loved animals deeply. She kept 2 dogs, and those animals were not simply pets to her. They were family. She spoke about them the way a mother speaks about her children, with tenderness, with worry, with a kind of quiet devotion that said everything about who she was as a person. By the time she reached her early 40s, Esther had chosen an unconventional life. She had no fixed address. She moved from place to place across Spain, staying in hostels and shelters, walking trails, meeting strangers, absorbing the country she had grown up in as though seeing it for the first time. It was a nomadic existence, yes, but it was hers. She had chosen it freely, and she moved through it with intention. Those who loved her understood that this was simply Esther. She would call, she would write, she would check in. She was not running away from her family. She was simply someone who needed open skies and changing horizons to feel fully alive. Her mother, Josefa, known warmly to everyone as Peppa, spoke with her daughter constantly, not weekly, not occasionally, constantly. Every single day, Esther and her mother exchanged messages, small hellos, little updates, the mundane details that hold a relationship together across distance. To Peppa, those daily messages were not just habit, they were proof of life. They were love, delivered in small, quiet installments. Esther also had a sister, Raquel, who knew her perhaps even more deeply than most. Raquel understood the rhythms of her younger sister, the way she wrote, the particular words she chose, the texture of her warmth in a text message. That intimate knowledge would in time become one of the most important tools in a family desperate to find the truth. In the years before her disappearance, Esther had endured something painful. She had been in a relationship that turned abusive. In 2022, she had filed a formal complaint against her ex-partner in Seville, a courageous act, and one that spoke to her resilience. The relationship was behind her. She was rebuilding. She was on the move, literally and figuratively, finding her footing again, one step at a time. It was in this chapter of her life, this in-between time of healing and wandering, that Esther found herself in the city of Alicante, in the summer of 2023. Alicante sits on Spain's eastern coast, where the Mediterranean curves inward and the light hits the water in long, shimmering lines. It is a port city, a city of arrivals and departures of tourists and wanderers and people passing through on their way to somewhere else. It has the feel of a place that does not ask too many questions. Esther was staying at a hostel there in the summer of 2023 when she encountered a man who introduced himself as Jose Jurado Montilla. He called himself Dinamita, which is the Spanish word for dynamite. He was 63 years old at the time, lean and weathered from years of walking the roads of Spain. He wore a baseball cap, bespectacled, often dressed in the casual way of a man who has shed the pretense of ordinary life. He looked by all accounts like an unremarkable older traveler, harmless, even friendly. He was in fact neither of those things. On social media, Jose Jurado Montilla had built a presence. His TikTok account under the username Dinamita Montilla documented his travels across Spain. He walked trails, he filmed sunsets, he spoke directly to the camera in a way that felt intimate and confessional. He had gathered thousands of followers who found him charming, perhaps a little eccentric, but fundamentally sincere. A solitary figure on the road, seeking connection, telling stories. What those followers did not know, what Esther did not know when she first smiled at him in the hostel lobby, was that Dinamita Montilla had a different name once. A name that police and prosecutors and victims' families had not forgotten. He was known as El Titi, and El Titi was one of Spain's most dangerous convicted serial killers. To understand what Esther walked into, we need to go back, far back, to the mountains and farmhouses of Malaga province in the mid-1980s, when a younger version of this same man began leaving bodies behind him on the roads of Andalusia. Jose Jurado Montilla was born in 1961 in the Spanish region of Extremadura, though he would spend much of his life in and around Malaga, that coastal city on the far southern edge of Spain where the sun hammers down and the hills smell of wild herbs and dry earth. His first known killing took place in November of 1985. The victim was a 57-year-old man named Francisco Gonzalez, a resident of a small farmhouse in the rural area of Almoquia, outside Malaga. Gonzalez was shot dead inside his own home, his body left and later covered with sacks. Montilla would later confess to this particular killing, though he insisted it was self-defense. He claimed he had been seeking shelter in the farmhouse, that Gonzalez had come at him with a shotgun, and that he had simply taken it and fired. Gonzalez's family rejected that account completely. The truth of those moments would remain contested. But the outcome was undeniable. A man was dead and Montilla had pulled the trigger. Before he could be brought to justice, Montilla killed again. In March of 1987, he murdered Antonio Paniagua, the personal chauffeur to a famous Spanish flamenco singer named Juanito Valderrama. The details of Paniagua's killing were grim. His remains were burned afterward, a deliberate act of destruction, as if Montilla were trying to unmake the evidence of what he had done. Then, in May of that same year, he struck twice more. Two tourists, a man from Germany and a man from the United Kingdom, were walking in the region of Malaga near the Caminito del Rey Trail, one of Spain's most scenic and rugged natural corridors. They were found stabbed and shot. Their names were not widely published. They were travelers, like Esther would one day be, far from home, walking roads that seemed safe. Montilla was arrested in the late 1980s and eventually convicted of all 4 murders. The court handed down a sentence of 123 years in prison, an enormous number, a number that seemed to promise he would never walk free again. But Spain's justice system had a mechanism called the Perot Doctrine, a set of sentencing guidelines that, when applied, allowed prisoners to serve considerably less time than their formal sentences. Montilla was one of many dangerous offenders who benefited from this doctrine. In 2013, after serving just 28 years behind bars, he was released. The European Court of Human Rights had ruled that the doctrine violated the rights of prisoners, and Spain was obligated to comply. The man who had shot and stabbed and burned his way through the countryside of Andalusia walked out of prison that December at 52 years old, blinking in the winter light, free. Out of prison, Montilla did not disappear quietly. He did something far stranger and, in retrospect, far more chilling. He built a public persona. He created his TikTok account and began documenting his life as a nomad. A free-spirited older man walking the length and breadth of Spain, filming the landscape, talking to strangers, sharing his thoughts on life and freedom. He positioned himself as a misunderstood man, a victim of an unjust system, someone who had served his time and emerged wiser and more peaceful. In his videos, he would speak about his past with a kind of practiced sorrow, insisting that most of what he had been convicted of was a lie. He told his thousands of followers that everything that happened in that part of the country was blamed on him, even though he had absolutely nothing to do with it. He said it with conviction. He said it with a wounded look in his eyes that the camera caught and amplified. People believed him, or at least enough people believed him to keep watching, keep commenting, keep sharing his videos. He was to his online audience a kind of eccentric elder, a wandering philosopher with a difficult past and a generous heart. The documentary director, who would later examine hundreds of hours of his footage, described a quality in Montilla that was deeply unsettling. He noted the man's ability to switch emotions in a single click from one second to the next, blending sadness with joy, anger with charm, all in the same video, with no transition and no mediation. It felt, the director said, like watching psychopathy perform itself in real time. But in 2022, before he ever met Esther, Montilla allegedly killed again. A 21-year-old college student, referred to publicly only as David, was found shot dead on his family's farm in Malaga. David had been farming that land, living his young life, when he encountered a man he later described to his father as an older man who looked very shady. He told his father this man had asked him about going out to hunt foxes together. The story had the ring of something innocuous. It did not remain innocuous for long. David was killed. His case went cold. The connection to Montilla would not be established for nearly 2 years. Not until advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to extract a genetic match from material found on David's backpack. But by then, another woman had already crossed Montilla's path. The summer of 2023 was warm across all of Spain, as summers in that country tend to be. The streets of Alicante shimmered in the heat, and the hostels and shelters of the city filled with travelers of all kinds, young people on holidays, older wanderers between places, people at turning points in their lives. Esther was staying in a women's shelter in Alicante when she met Montilla. He was in the lobby of the hostel, his camera somewhere nearby, his easy smile deployed with the practiced comfort of someone who has done this many times. We do not know exactly what they said to each other in those first moments. We do not know whether she recognized something uncomfortable in him, or whether he seemed entirely ordinary, just another traveler with interesting stories, which is precisely what he wanted to seem like. What we know is that they spoke, and that a connection was established, and that Esther, who was open and warm and trusting by nature, accepted this man as a companion. Over the following weeks, they traveled together. Montilla documented portions of their shared journey on TikTok. filming the roads they walked, the towns they passed through, the landscape spread out around them like something from a painting. To his followers, it looked like the natural footage of his wandering life. To investigators who would later comb through those videos frame by frame, they became a timeline, a digital breadcrumb trail that led directly to the hours before Esther vanished. On the morning of the 22nd of August, 2023, Esther and Montilla set out on a hike together. They walked from the town of Denia toward the coastal town of Gandia, a distance of 37 kilometers along paths that wound through the hills and valleys of the Valencia region. It was a long walk, a demanding walk, even for experienced hikers. At some point during or after that hike, Esther began to suffer. Her leg was swollen, badly enough to cause significant pain. She had developed a severe headache. By the time they reached Gandia, she was clearly unwell. Montilla called emergency services. An ambulance came. Esther was taken to the hospital alone. She left the landscape of that hike in the back of an ambulance, separated from Montilla, bound for a place of care and safety, or so it seemed. Esther was discharged from the hospital at 4:30 in the morning on August 23rd, 2023. That is the last time any official record shows her alive and under the care of medical professionals. 13 hours later, a WhatsApp message arrived on her mother's phone. The message said Esther was broke. It said she was about to leave Spain entirely. It said she was going to start a new life in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and that she would not be able to communicate with her family anymore. Peppa, her mother, read those words and felt something move through her that she could not name precisely. Esther had always been a wanderer, yes. She had always moved unpredictably, but she had never simply vanished. She had never announced a new life in a foreign country with the flat, emotionless brevity of a text message. She had never left her dogs, not like this. Not without a real goodbye, not without the warmth and texture that characterized everything Esther wrote. When Peppa tried to call back, the phone was already off. The line was dead. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a chest with dread. Hours became days, days became weeks. Peppa and the family filed a missing persons report with the police in Alicante. The response, devastatingly common in cases involving adult women who live unconventional lives, was muted. Esther was 42 years old. She was known to move around. She had communicated, however strangely, about leaving. The police did not treat her disappearance with the urgency her family knew it deserved. But Raquel, Esther's older sister, knew. She looked at those messages and she shook her head. The words were wrong, the tone was wrong, the rhythm was wrong. Esther did not write the way those messages read. The warmth was absent. The particular cadences of her voice, the little phrases she used, the warmth she always embedded in even the shortest messages, none of it was there. Raquel told anyone who would listen, those messages did not come from Esther. She was right. On the 8th of September, 2023, Peppa's phone rang. It was a man she did not know. He introduced himself carefully, explaining that he had seen the missing persons report. He told her that he had been staying at the same hostel in Alicante where Esther had been. He told her he had already spoken to the police, and he wanted her to know directly, wanted her to hear from him personally, that the last time he had seen Esther was when he accompanied her to a health center in Gandia because her legs were hurting a great deal. The man's name was Jose Jurado Montilla. He was calling Esther's mother. He was inserting himself into the family's grief. He was asking questions about the police investigation, about what they had found, about what they knew. At the time, Peppa was desperate for any lead, any connection, any thread that might lead her back to her daughter. She accepted his call and subsequent calls with the gratitude of a woman drowning. He appeared helpful. He appeared concerned. He spoke of Esther with what seemed like genuine affection. He even went back out onto the roads they had walked together and filmed himself doing so, posting the video on TikTok. Addressing it to Esther directly, saying he missed her and asking her for some sign of life. It was a performance, and it was deeply calculated, but slowly something shifted. The family began to notice that Montilla's curiosity about the investigation seemed less like the concern of a friend and more like the monitoring of a suspect. He asked too many questions. He called too often. He was too eager to know exactly what the police were doing and thinking. So Peppa did what any mother might do when instinct takes over from grief. She typed his name into a search engine. The real shock came when the results loaded. When the family discovered Montilla's history, the world shifted beneath their feet. Here was the man who had walked beside Esther in her final days. Here was the man calling to offer help. Here was the charming TikTok wanderer who spoke of his own innocence in video after video, who had built thousands of followers on a story of redemption and misunderstanding. And here, in plain text, in old court documents and archived news stories, was the reality. A conviction for 4 murders, a sentence of 123 years, 4 dead people in the hills and farmhouses of Malaga in the 1980s. The family contacted the police immediately. They urged investigators to focus on Montilla. They shared what they knew, but the investigation moved with what felt to them like terrible slowness. The case of a wandering woman with an unconventional lifestyle and a message that suggested she had simply moved on did not command the resources and the urgency that Peppa and Raquel felt in their bones every single day. The family began investigating themselves. They went through Montilla's TikTok videos with meticulous attention, the way investigators sift through evidence, one frame at a time. They cross-referenced dates and locations. They tracked his movements through geotags and background details in his footage. They consulted with lawyers. They pushed, they demanded, they refused to accept that Esther had simply walked off into a new life in South America and left everything and everyone she loved behind. Meanwhile, officially, the search for Esther was suspended by authorities in June of 2024, nearly a full year after her disappearance. By then, the investigation had begun to converge on Montilla from a different direction entirely. In the spring of 2024, Spanish investigators received the results of advanced DNA analysis conducted on evidence from the murder scene of the young man named David. David had been 21 years old when he was shot on his family's farm in Malaga in August of 2022, the summer before Esther vanished. He had told his father about an encounter with a strange older man. He had been killed shortly afterward. His case had sat unsolved for almost 2 years. The DNA extracted from a backpack found at the scene was now identified as a familial match to Jose Jurado Montilla. The police moved. They tracked Montilla through his own TikTok posts, following the trail of videos he was still making as he walked through Spain, apparently unaware or unconcerned that his digital presence was functioning as a GPS beacon. They located him in May of 2024, near the border between Spain and Portugal, in the region of Extremadura. He was found in a bar. He was arrested. When investigators examined the contents of his phone, they found something that erased any remaining ambiguity about what he had done to Esther Estepa. There were photographs, there were videos. They showed a woman, a body, on a sleeping bag. The photographs showed what investigators believe was Esther after she was already dead. They established beyond the timeline Montilla had constructed for her family and for the public that he had been with her long after he claimed they had parted ways. 3 weeks after his arrest, in June of 2024, investigators searching a remote area on the outskirts of Gandia found skeletal remains in dense brush near a highway median. They were identified as Esther Estepa. She had been there, in that thicket, through autumn and winter and spring and into the following summer. While her mother called and waited and searched and pushed and refused to give up, Esther had been lying just outside the edge of a road in the landscape of the last walk she ever took. The autopsy conducted on Esther's remains was devastating in its findings. Investigators determined that she had been sexually assaulted. She had also been struck on the head with a blunt object. According to information shared with her family and later reported widely, prosecutors believed that the weapon used was a crucifix, a religious object Montilla had been known to carry with him on his travels, and which was conspicuously absent from his possessions when he was arrested. The nature of these findings, combined with the photographs recovered from his phone and the DNA evidence tying him to David's murder, painted a picture of a man who had continued, decades after his first conviction, to hurt and kill the people he encountered on the roads of Spain. He had simply changed his method. He had changed his name, he had changed his image, he had wrapped himself in the aesthetics of a misunderstood wanderer, and placed a camera between himself and the world, and the camera had made him look human. But the camera, in the end, also undid him. It would be incomplete and deeply unfair to tell this story without lingering on what Peppa and Raquel did in the months between Esther's disappearance and her killer's arrest. Peppa was not a detective. She was not a legal professional. She was a mother in her 60s whose daughter had gone missing in a country that for a long time did not treat that disappearance with sufficient seriousness. She had no formal training in investigation. She had grief and love and an absolute refusal to accept that Esther had simply chosen to vanish. Together with Raquel, she watched Montila's TikTok content with obsessive care. They looked for details in the background of his videos. They noted the dates of his posts, the geography of his locations, the way his story shifted subtly over time. They documented everything. They took their findings to lawyers and to journalists and to anyone who would listen. They also endured something particularly cruel, which was the knowledge that Montilla had been writing to them as Esther, that those messages about Buenos Aires and a new life had come from his hands and not hers. He had tried to build a false trail, a digital fiction in which Esther had simply chosen to disappear, to ensure that no one looked too hard at the last person who had walked beside her. But Raquel had known. The messages did not sound like her sister. She had said so from the beginning, and eventually the evidence would prove her right in the most absolute and heartbreaking way. The family's investigation was, according to those close to the case, a significant contributing factor in keeping pressure on authorities and ultimately in ensuring that Montilla did not simply slip back into his traveling life, posting videos and walking roads and meeting strangers as if nothing had happened. As of the time this story is being told to you tonight, Jose Jurado Montilla remains in prison in Spain awaiting trial. He has been formally charged with 2 homicides, the killing of Esther Estepa and the killing of David, the young college student shot on his family's farm in Malaga in 2022. He faces a potential sentence of 30 years for each murder under Spain's current laws, the maximum sentence allowed under the Spanish legal system for a single murder conviction. He has denied any involvement in both deaths. He did not participate in the Netflix documentary, the 2-part series called The TikTok Killer, which premiered in March of 2026 and told the story of Esther's disappearance through the eyes of her family and through the archive of Montilla's own social media content. Some of his former online followers, even after his arrest and the emergence of the evidence against him, have continued to express belief in his innocence. It is a reminder of how thoroughly a carefully constructed persona can take hold of an audience, and how difficult it is for some people to reconcile the image they have been given with the truth that lies beneath it. The trial does not yet have a confirmed date. Esther's case technically was never formally closed even during the long months when authorities were not actively searching. Her family continues to mark the anniversary of her death, August 23rd, as the day they lost her. Before we close tonight, let us stay with Esther for a moment. Not with what was done to her, but with who she was. She was 42 years old, which is not old at all, not really, not when you think about all the mornings she had not yet woken up to, all the roads she had not yet walked. She was a daughter who called her mother every single day. She was a sister whose writing style was so distinctively her own that someone who loved her could tell immediately when words were not hers. She was someone who had endured real pain, a painful relationship, the kind that leaves marks that take time to heal, and who had chosen to meet that pain by moving toward life rather than away from it. She packed what she needed, and she walked out into her country, into the landscape of southern Spain, and she tried to find herself again. She had 2 dogs she adored. She had a laugh that lingered. She had a warmth that strangers felt and remembered. She had a family who never stopped looking for her, even when institutions did. The cruelty of this case is not only in how Esther died, though that cruelty is real and heavy. It is also in the question of how it could have been prevented. Montilla had been convicted of 4 murders. He had served his time and been released into a world that did not advertise his history, did not flag it, did not in any meaningful way prevent him from continuing to move through life as freely as the woman he would one day walk beside and then destroy. He found her the way predators find the vulnerable, in a shelter, in a city where she had few connections, in a chapter of her life when she was still reassembling the pieces of herself after something that had already tried to diminish her. She deserved better from the systems that should have kept her safer. She deserved to finish her healing, to walk those roads to their ends, to return to her dogs and her family, and to whatever version of herself was waiting on the other side of the difficult year she had been living. Tonight we told the story of Esther Estepa, a woman who loved deeply, a woman who wandered freely, a woman whose family refused to let the world forget her, even when it tried. Her killer had 4 victims on his record before he ever met her. He spent 28 years in prison and came out not changed, but simply waiting for the next opportunity. He wrapped himself in the image of a gentle nomad and put a camera in front of it, and enough people believed the image that it sustained him for years. In the end, it was that same camera, those same videos, those same posts that exposed him. The digital trail he left in the name of storytelling became the evidence that put him in handcuffs near the Spanish-Portuguese border in a bar in May of 2024. Esther's family continues to wait for the trial. They continue to mark her anniversary. They continue to say her name, and so do we tonight. Esther Estepa, 42 years old, from Seville, Spain. Loved, searched for, remembered. Rest well tonight wherever you are. Let the story settle and then release it, the way you release a breath, gently, completely. I'm wishing you a restful sleep tonight, and if you're still awake, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, and until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.